It's been very quiet on the Cornwall front at the moment because Cornwall, my word, when everything was going off in Kent, and bear in mind, it's still sort of going off in Kent as well, but it's just very, very quiet. Suspiciously so, I would probably think so at this point. But Cornwall imploding also the way it did kind of caught me off guard when it all went down as well, because that was fascinating when the stuff started happening out in Kent. But the Cornwall one has been fascinating in different ways because they have come out, those defectors, and specifically, they have made reference to that unit down in London. The fact that reform councillors, those reform councillors, are basically controlled by that unit down in London, that they have to toe the party line. And if you don't, well, that's when you're going to have problems. And it is not the first time we are hearing this. It's not the first time we've even seen this either. We've just done the video about the entire reform chapter that got completely dissolved because they lost control of it. And the guy was saying, yeah, it was because they had disagreements with the National of what they were telling them to do. So there is a lot more, I think, going on behind the scenes that is very, very clearly starting to come to the fore. Back when all this happened, back when all this started, and we were seeing that, that control unit down in London, I very clearly said at the time, this isn't going to work. No other party does that for very good reasons. And now some of these reform councillors are chafing under these directions because they know their local constituency isn't really going to care. Because what Nigel Farage really wants isn't councillors, it's MPs. And the worst thing, honestly, that's happened to Farage is the fact that these people have got in because you can now plainly see what a reform government would look like. It wouldn't be good, which is why desperately at the moment, they're now trying to move the conversation onto economic issues, trying to prove we are economically competent. We promise. Bear in mind, the last time they put out a manifesto, it was like Liz Truss on speed, on crack, whatever drug of choice you want to pick, literally. Economic competence, I think not, especially bear in mind in the fact reform's economic competence is going to be challenged quite a bit when we get to the budget session for some of these councils starting in December. So I wonder why they're very eager to move the needle and start talking about economic stuff at the moment. Anyway, before, of course, we go on talking more about the Cornwall situation, about how there is no problem down in Cornwall. Please do remember, of course, to click on the like, share, and of course, subscribe button as well. There are links down below, the Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link, the YouTube thank you button, all that good stuff down below. The YouTube membership down below as well. This QR code up here will take you straight to the Patreon page as well. So thank you very much. Don't forget to, of course, click the like, share, and subscribe button. Ring the bell as well so you get notifications when we go live and when we drop a new video. And of course, as always, don't forget to comment down below as well. As always, if you are from Cornwall as well, would love to know what you think about all this stuff going on down here as well. It's always very interesting when I see locals comment because very often you guys have a lot more information, a lot more stuff that very often doesn't get reported or talked about. So I'm very, very interested when, like I say, you guys do comment in that way. So let's crack on to this and find out why there's no problem down in Cornwall. And honestly, this guy, this reform leader down in Cornwall, he comes very much across like the mayor in Jaws. There's no killer shark. Meanwhile, of course, in the background, someone gets eaten by a shark. Quite literally. So in this case, so will more chaos in Cornwall follow? I think potentially so. I think potentially so. When there's been problems like this in the past, it settles down for a bit. And I think we're seeing that now in Kent and Cornwall. It settles down for a bit, and then it all starts up again. You know, give it time. These people will cook themselves as they always do. So let's get on then into this. So, Reform UK leader says there is no crisis in Cornwall. It's all just a blip. Yes, a blip. So, following now a dreadful month for Reform UK in Cornwall, which has now seen infighting amongst members in public and now a series of high profile councillor resignations, the party's new group leader at the Cornwall Council has now countered any suggestions of a crisis by stressing the Troubles have just simply been a blip. Time will tell. Time will tell if this was just a blip or a sign of more things to come. Anyway, Councillor Paul Ashton, who also refuted the comments by the group's former deputy leader that the local councillors have to focus on national reform policies such as immigration and net zero, rather than actually prioritising important issues affecting the Cornish voters, such as affordable housing and public services. So this is the big one, because this is not the first time this claim has been made. This has been made by a lot of other former Cornwall councillors, or, you know, been let slip by reform councillors themselves. We've seen the focus they have put on net zero. We've seen the focus that they've been putting on immigration. Whereas net zero, you know, councillors can, you know, do some stuff about that. Immigration, there's not a lot of stuff they could do unless they really want to start, you know, challenging the migrant hotel stuff and, you know, start trying to take the government to court over this stuff, which, bear in mind, the Conservatives themselves planned to do at one point, but then backed away from because even they realized actually that's quite a dumb thing to do. But anyway, let's get on to this. He said that there was no directive from Nigel Farage or any other reform grandee that members have to now toe the national line. He said there is nobody from HQ breathing down our necks saying that you've got to do this or you've got to do that. I call bull on that, because if that's the case, why is there that reform local unit in London? Why have you literally got someone at HQ who is responsible for all those councillors coming up with policy? You know, there is no shark. There is no killer shark on the beach. It's perfectly safe. Anyway, Councillor Ashton, of course, made these comments in his first interview since being elected the group leader by his fellow Reform councillors, who made up the largest political group on the Cornwall Council. That was, of course, until 5 members then jumped ship away from to form a breakaway Cornish independent non-aligned group. Their numbers now also include his predecessor, Rob Parsonage, whose wife Christine also resigned from the new group and the council last week. So that was probably a long time coming. This was the person, if you remember, who never turned up to a meeting, missed all the meetings because she doesn't even live in the area where she's from or anywhere close. So I suppose that's a good thing in many ways. At least, you know, she's finally realized that she can't really continue on in that situation. So, you know, good for them, at least on that one. The Reform Group is, of course, now the biggest political opposition with just 23 councillors, next to the Liberal Democrats, 26, who, of course, formed a coalition with a cabinet of independent members following the May elections. So this is where it starts to get into the interview. So as I sat down at the new county hall in Truro with Councillor Ashton, who lives, of course, in the St Astol Poller and Matthew Charles division that he represents, the first topic of conversation had to, of course, be what many onlookers have deemed now a crisis for Reform UK. He said, "I do not call this a crisis. We might call it a blip. The majority of our councillors were good. Were doing good casework, building relationships with their communities, and then serving on committees. These issues, of course, cropped up, and we'd rather they didn't. but it was caused due to internal difficulty, and it was, of course, sad to see them move on from reform. I'm sure by the sounds of it, he really was absolutely sad, given the fact of that leaked pub recording, if you remember that one. We need to, of course, try and put this behind us and move forward in a very positive way. Our electorate, of course, demands that, really. We've learned a lot from it. We're a new party, and and we know this, of course, goes on from time to time in other parties. So we're not, of course, unusual in that respect. No, it doesn't go on. It does, but not to this extent. Bear in mind, it does, but not to this extent, I would say. Anyway, he continues. So we're not, of course, unusual in that respect. We're, of course, disappointed because we're trying to, of course, be different. How be different when you've got no policies at hand? It, of course, wasn't a good look, and of course, we'd rather it didn't happen. Some people have probably been, of course, disappointed with us. We're sorry that has happened. But in the terms, of course, of long-term damage, I do not think that is the case. I think people, of course, are really rooting for reform, and people we've met in the recent weeks have been, of course, understanding that these things, of course, happen, but want a better future. But here's the thing. None of this is short-term. This is long-term stuff. This is reform. This is what they act like. This is what they do. Now, are there likely to be decent councillors there who generally want to do a good job for their local community? You ain't going to be able to do that, because despite this guy's protestations that there is no, you know, reform, local reform control unit in Reform HQ with someone who they've been, elected to do that job to keep their councillors in line, who they've been very open with the fact that this unit exists, backed up by the fact of other reform councillors and ex-reform councillors, not just in Cornwall, but in other places as well, that yes, that unit does exist, and that's where these councillors take their marching orders from. Very likely, very unlikely that they are going to be able to do any good jobs for their local communities. So, is this, of course, definitely end of the drama? He replied, I have no knowledge of anyone else who, of course, is going to resign. It would, of course, be a real shock if that happened. We've now got 23 councillors raring to go. At least a bit of reset, new leadership, new vision, new strategy. We've got, of course, a very positive outlook. So what does that mean? So he said, it is basically, of course, refreshing what we've got already, which is our, of course, contract for Cornwall, which we used during the election. It is about making sure we are an effective opposition, that we're scrutinising key decisions. Basically, what every other opposition party would do. How is that different? How is this some bold new strategy? He continued, I'd of course like reform to be in power. If we were in power, I'd want to do a complete overhaul of the council. Not in, of course, any destructive way. I'm totally sure it's not destructive. He continued, I've spent, of course, my life working in public services. So it's not to be foolish, but of course to apply a real external view of how we're doing things. Yeah, external view, Doge. This is once again a mandate that has come from that reform unit down in London. Doge, cut spending, cut services. This is what they are doing in every one of these councils, but they're realizing, oh, we can't. Hence why they're now all pretty much having to raise council tax. He said, I'd obviously like to get stuck into the housing issue to find new innovative ways to try and bring about affordable housing and social housing particularly. Not in, of course, the way that they're built at the moment. I'd like to see more one-person and two-person dwellings, particularly now for our Cornish people, which is a really weird way to phrase that, honestly. I also, of course, want to look at our arm's length companies and their efficiencies. Just look again and try and refreshing our visions, as it's now costing us a lot of money at the moment. Again, all about efficiency savings. Oh, it's efficiency, it's efficiency, it's efficiency. Never about efficiency. Just as the Tories realised that you don't talk about cuts, you just talk about efficiencies, and it changes the conversation. We're not making cuts, we're just making efficiency savings. Yeah, The problem is that doesn't work because the Tories have done this song and dance for decades. Well, for at least a decade now. People have more than caught on to that. Councillor Ashton also went on to add housing is, of course, very difficult to afford. Do we, of course, stand back and do nothing? We have to now refresh the whole thing. Try and get rid of the huge debt. We have now, of course, the 12th biggest council debt in the country. We can't allow that to run forever. So what are you going to do differently that makes housing more affordable? What are you going to do on that? How are you going to ensure that gets addressed? Once again, it's say things and then, you know. Also, the issue is to do with farms across Cornwall. There is, of course, some decisions, of course, made very recently about selling off farmhouses and small parcels of land. The portfolio holder made it, of course, very clear that selling off farms is, of course, not happening. He made it, of course, very absolutely clear that we want to, of course, probe that a little bit more. Does that, of course, mean altogether or just for now? We are trying to wait an independent report that is due, and we are secure to scrutinize that. We are, of course, pro farming and pro fisheries. Not according to anyone else. I mean, apparently, according to your ex-reform people, you aren't pro-farming at all. And pro-fisheries, well, when was the last time Nigel Farage ever talked about fishing? We want to, of course, see those industries supported, and of course, we want to see them grow and flourish, becoming, of course, more dynamic than they are at the moment because they are now being held back. Held back by what? What's holding fishing back at the moment? Oh, that's right, Brexit. Would love to see that happen. Would love to see that get discussed in Cornwall Council if that gets brought up on that front. Just goes on a bit about him, about who he was. He worked for the NHS on that one. So, this is actually interesting. So they asked, of course, about who the Reform candidate is going to be, of course, to try and replace Councillor Christine Parsonage. How will that candidate, of course, be chosen? Will it be local branch managers that decide, or will the candidate be imposed from London? He said, we haven't got a candidate yet. We're currently on the case. I've been talking to a few people for the last few days about that. Watch this space. It'll be someone we decide locally. I'm sure it will be. I'm sure it will be. I'm sure the National Party from London, that office that controls everything, totally won't impose a candidate on that one. Anyway, does, of course, Ashton agree that constituency chairmen should, of course, be banned from now seeking election as parliamentary candidates? This is, of course, been a bit hot topic within Reform, as this was one of the local reasons that recent public heated arguments in the Cornish pub, which then went on to embarrass local members. He said there are, of course, two elements to now most parties. There is the corporate element and there's the local council. What? Corporate elements? What? Ultimately, we want to speak as one voice. If you've got a candidate who's doing a superb job with the chair, why would you want to put them forward? You've got to decide, of course, the right way forward. We have an agreement that is, of course, not the best practice to put a councillor that is also the chair of the branch. So we're now trying to sort that out in cases where, of course, that's happened. Is there, of course, a disconnect between the party, what is seeking nationally, and what Reform councils want to achieve locally? The Reform defectors said last week that there is a disparity between, again, good question on this. This reporter is doing a really good job holding this guy to his feet to this fire on this one. They said that there is a disparity between the national agenda and the interests of local residents. He said, no, I've never seen that. I saw the comments that were made and I do not recognise it at all. First and foremost, we are councillors for our division. I think this guy's just disagreeing. Said, no, we're not disagreeing. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in this one. Time will tell in this one, but there's more than enough evidence that we've seen over the years. Ex-councillors pretty much confirming that is the case. Reform councillors themselves saying that is the case. And of course, even the guy himself who's in charge at that unit at the local government organisation conference saying that was the case at the unit down in London will run everything. Anyway, he continued. He said the people who elected us as course were people that we serve. Whilst we try to carry the party's national interest views into the work that we do, Gee, totally not the national at all. I've never, of course, experienced anybody who has said you must toe the national line. I am very clear on that. It is not an issue for our councillors. There is nobody from HQ breathing down our necks trying to say you've got to do this or you've got to do that. I'm perfectly sure there isn't, when there's plenty of other reform councillors, ex-reform councillors, even the guy himself who ran that unit down in London, pretty much doing that. um, so back to this. What is, of course, the reaction to the opinion that reform, of course, is far right, fascist, and racist because of its immigration stance? I saw that myself, of course, during the election period when I went door knocking. A couple of people stood at the doorstep, said, "You're a fascist and you're a racist." To those people said, "You're entitled to your view, but I'm not a racist. There's not a racist bone in my body at all." Then why would you stand for reform? Um, our family is, of course, mixed race. Many of our councillors have mixed race families. We're just ordinary people that have a centre right view about things, but not far right. We are not against legal migration at all. It is about the illegal migration, which is leading to a lot of stress and strains in our country. But it's not illegal migration that is, it's the legal one because of the wordplay that Farage and etc. have done about that. They know this and have done this before. This is the whole thing of, oh, you know, we've got, mixed race families. They're fine. They're integrated. It's just those ones that can't integrate that are the problem. It's middle class racism through and through. And again, if he wasn't racist, why would he be in reform? Who have some of the most racist policies that are out there when it comes to immigration. For example, wanting to get rid of settled status, people who have settled status. Bear in mind, that caused one of their councillors in Cornwall to switch back to the Conservatives very recently. Anyway, he continues. We, of course, want to try and capture back some of those things that we believe we've lost in recent years and some things that need radical change. The country is now sliding into bankrupt, almost. There has to be something new to take the country forward. We're not sliding into bankruptcy. That's ridiculous. But has reform actually got any political heft and any experience, of course, to do that? He said, yes, that is why I moved from my seat last year to become a councillor for reform, because I didn't want to see any more of this sliding and loss of culture and identity. Yeah, anyone who ever worries about culture and lost identity, I'm sorry, but tends to be quite racist reasoning behind that. Anyway, I would love to know apparently what, you know, we've lost in our culture in this. But anyway, um decisions, of course, were being made that seems crazy to me with my business background. Again, you don't run a council or something like a business. It's never worked out that way. I think, of course, we've got a very strong leader who actually speaks to you about what he believes, which is something now of great value. Despite where you're on the spectrum of politics, you've got a leader who says what he thinks. Is that necessarily a good thing? Not really. But I'm sure, of course, Farage can say and promise anything to, of course, boost his popularity while he's the opposition leader with a party of just 5 MPs. He replied to saying, "I've heard that before, but I don't believe it. I believe he's a man of integrity and passion and cares radically about this country." I'm sure he does. But trust me, if Farage gets in, oh boy, out goes all that integrity for sure. Anyway, he continued. Of course, we want to have more of an understanding of what it's like to live in the countryside. We're losing our shops, post offices, pubs, etc. closing. Even some of the churches now are closing. It's not, but it's not lost. I think we could cover some of that ground. So, shops, pubs, again, post office, sure, those things that serve the local community. Why are they not serving the local community anymore? Things need to be asked about that question. I think there's a lot of deeper things that need to be going on around that. But churches, if a congregation isn't there anymore to support the church, then of course you're going to see a church close. Or is this guy actually going to talk about the real reason why some of these churches are closing? Is there is now a lack of priests to actually serve these churches? Or is he going to start calling for more people to follow the vocation? I don't see Reform calling for that in their manifesto. And of course, which branch of Christianity are they going to sort of suddenly start supporting on that one? Will, of course, Councillor Ashton, of course, still be the Reform UK's leader this time next year on Cornwall. One thing, of course, is for certain, he will want at least a very less eventful 6 months than the party's currently experienced since May's Cornwall Council election. Will there be more problems for this guy? Oh, absolutely. I don't think the problems for Reform in Cornwall are over. They aren't in power down there. They're just the opposition. So in a way where we've covered a lot of stuff very recently, they can't mess things up. They can't, screw up a budget or, local government reform if they were in power. But they are they were the largest party of opposition. Then they're still the largest party of opposition, but they're no longer the largest party now. That is because there has been a very big resurgence in Lib Dems in that area very recently. I wouldn't be surprised if in that by-election the Lib Dems won. So we'll see what happens, of course, and we'll keep an eye on Cornwall. Will things calm down? Doubt it. Doubt it very much, but we'll see. But let me know what you think about this, what this guy had to say. But as always, we'll see you all next time.